Ina alhamdulillah, wa salat, wa salam ala wa rasulullah. I want to welcome everybody to our series on the Maqasidic Tafsir. And this is our class, whereas we're going over the book by Sheikh Kareem Abu Zaid that addresses, really how the scholars of the Quran, the tools they use, the methodology that they use to explain, clarify, and help us to not only understand the meaning of the Quran, but how to implement it into our lives. And that's what's so important. And the last time that we met for this class, which was Tuesday, we spoke about how the Quran is not just a book. It's not a creation of Allah, as some people say. This is incorrect. The Quran are the words of Allah. It's Allah speaking to us, Allah telling us things that we need to know in regards to how to live our lives the way Allah wanted us to live them, and also how to handle the trials that come with living life that way. So we have to be able to understand that it's Allah speaking. This is the speech of Allah, the words of Allah. And I think that if a lot of the Muslims today, especially those Muslim youth who suffer with doubts about their religion and all of that, if you would stop viewing the Quran as a creation of Allah, or in other words, just viewing it as a book, then maybe you can begin the journey back to Allah and fulfilling the higher aim of your purpose, which is to worship Him the way He commanded and to live your life earning His love. So let's put the PowerPoint up on the screen for tonight's lecture. And tonight's class is going to be short because I know we've had a lot of classes today. And in fact, all the classes today centered around the Quran, which is why it's so important for you guys to really try to support this dawah effort. And how can you support? What can you do to help us? We are a nonprofit organization. We don't receive any grants from the government. We rely 100% on your donations. And if you enjoy coming here to learn Islam and its truthfulness with the correct understanding, which is the understanding of those original companions, you can help us with this by supporting us, making donations every month to keep us on the internet. So please support us. Okay, so I'm going to put the PowerPoint up on the screen for tonight's lecture. We've had so many classes today, all focusing around the Quran. So I'm not going to be long with you guys because this is a lot of information. You learned about Tayammum from Dr. Ibrahim Jamali. Sheikh Saud gave the beautiful meaning of Surat al-Masad. Okay, Masad. And so now, here we go. I put it up there. Yeah, inshallah, you guys should be able to see it. Yeah. Oh, tonight we're going to be covering pages 106 to 108. Pages 106 to 108 of the book. But before I get into it, I want to just ask one question. One question from the last time we met. When we met for this class on Tuesday, I spoke about how the Quran is not just a book, and how the Quran is not a creation of Allah, but instead it's something better than all of that. It's the words of Allah. And once you start thinking of the Quran that way, once you start thinking of how Allah is speaking to us through those words of his, you can develop an understanding of the goal behind it. So who can tell us what is the goal behind the words of Allah? What is it? What is the goal behind the words of the Quran? What's the goal? What is the main purpose? Why did Allah even tell us these things? What's the goal of the words behind the Quran? Who can answer that? And we should get a lot of different answers. Anyone?
The goal is to assure us that we have support from our Creator that created us. We did not create ourselves. So therefore, the law is our guide.
Okay.
He gives us ayats and signs, and he gives us chapters. He teaches us over and over and over again how to understand him, that he's our protector, that he's the one we need to turn to, and we need to trust him completely.
Okay, that's good. That's one of the goals of the words of Allah. Allah wants us to know that he's aware of everything that we do. And also Allah wants us to know that not only is he aware, but he wants us to know that he's there in case we need help. He's there in case we need guidance. Okay, he wants us to be aware that the goal behind Allah's words is that we're not alone. That we're not alone. That's one of the goals. What's another goal behind the words of Allah? Anybody else?
Allah. The word of Allah is also to warn us about the punishment awaiting for us, to give us glad tidings about the goodness like Jannah that is waiting for us if we do as he asks us to do, and to inform us about what had happened before and what will happen.
Okay, good job. That's another goal of Allah, to warn us as to what will happen if we fail to fulfill the obligations that he's imposed upon us, if we fail to fulfill the purpose of our creation. The goals of the words of Allah is to remind us as to what will happen. Okay, good job. Any other goals behind the words of the Quran?
Another goal is to give you hope and to give you strength, and far as in the stories that's in the Quran from previous decades and everything. So the goal is to give you strength and to give you hope.
Exactly. MashaAllah. You guys got it. The words of Allah, Allah wants us to always have hope. He doesn't want us to just fear him. He doesn't want us to just be conscious of him, but he wants us to have hope. And by the way, those three answers that you all gave, you summarized what it takes to be a believer. In order to be a believer, you have to have three things. You have to have three characteristics. You have to have love for Allah. You have to have fear of his punishment, and you have to have hope of his mercy. That's the goal behind the words of Allah. To help us, to aid us, to encourage us, to also admonish us, to cause us to be conscious of him, to the point that we accept that everything we do, every decision we make, every choice we take in this world, it's going to come with repercussions. And either those repercussions are going to be good for us or they're going to be bad for us. Because unto him is the final return. Okay, we're living here. It doesn't just end when we die. I know a lot of us, myself included, we can become so overwhelmed with life like I am right now, so melancholy, so overwhelmed with life, that your personal jinn will try to cause you to lose that hope. And so for those of us, for those people who don't believe in Allah, they listen to their jinn and they lose hope. They'll end it. They'll just take their life. They'll say, what's the point? Let me just kill myself. Let me just take a bunch of pills and go to sleep. And when I go to sleep, that'll be the end of it. But we know that that's not true. We can take a bunch of pills, you go to sleep. If you don't wake up, you in a worse situation than this, because now you're going to answer to Allah for losing hope, and you're going to be being punished for the rest of eternity. There ain't no coming back from death. So Allah wants us to know, that He's aware of everything. So we have to be conscious of ourselves, our choices, our lifestyle, our decisions. And yes, it's going to be overwhelming sometimes. It's going to be hard sometimes, but we have to keep the balance of love, hope, and fear, and never deviate from that balance like the Kafirs are doing. Yeah, by the way, I was watching on the news today how they said the suicide rate for the past year has just tripled. There's so many people taking their own lives, and they blame it on the war and all the climate things that's happening. And it probably is, because man is weak, especially those that don't believe in Allah. But I'm telling all you Muslim women and you Muslim children out there who despair, never despair of the mercy of Allah. Never allow life to become so overwhelming that you think that it's better off just ending it, because there is no end. It's only another beginning. Well, once we die, we're not asleep. It's a whole new world, a whole new beginning, and it's terrible. That's why the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said if there was anything to fear other than Allah, it would be death. Okay? So don't be a statistic. And I'm talking to you new Shahada women. Don't make yourself a statistic, because you're so overwhelmed with the trials of life. We got to keep that hope. And so that's why it's important to not only read the Quran, but to ponder its meaning. And that's also why the Prophet tells us to ask the people of knowledge too. We don't teach ourselves the religion. We ask the people of knowledge. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was the first interpreter of the Quran, as we all know, the words of Allah. And he struggled to try to get to explain to the companions what Allah was saying, so that they could reach high and grasp the true understanding of Allah's words, and then in turn apply it to their lives, because life can be overwhelming. And I want you guys to remember, for a lot of you who are struggling because of the war that's going on in the world, think about those original companions. They were at war constantly. They were fighting against people from the time they converted to Islam to their death. They didn't have any. They lived in the war era. They lived in the dark ages, which is the worst ages of man's history. And it was nothing but war and death everywhere. So the Prophet was the first interpreter to explain the higher aims of the Quran to the companions, to tell them that everything that happens in this world is a test. Everything that happens in this world, it happens because Allah willed it. He made sure that the companions understood that man is not in control of anything. The Romans, the Persians, the pharaohs of Egypt, they have no power to do anything to anyone unless Allah allows it. Okay, so okay, yeah, I see. Let me fix it. So the truly good interpreter. Wait a minute, let me put it. Yeah, I messed it up. So a good interpreter of the Quran, he will use the same technique that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used. He would take the words of Allah and identify what objectives were in the words of Allah, and in turn, explain it to the people as a means of giving them hope and giving them guidance as to how to live their lives effectively. And again, how does the interpreter get this true understanding? He's got to investigate not only the Quran, but he has to also investigate the hadiths that relate to those verses that he's using, because the hadiths are the explanation of the Quran. And he also has to use analogy, and he has to use analysis. He has to be able to break down the meaning of the words of Allah. He has to also use the science of connectivity. So in turn, by putting all of these different science techniques together, he can then give us the highest understanding of the words that can help bring about betterment for us in our personal lives. And before we identify the higher aims or parts of the Quranic verses, we must specify the primary and the founding purpose for which Allah revealed this book to us. And again, as we talked about in that first question here, Allah revealed the Quran to us to encourage us to listen to it, to ponder his words, to practice how to recite those words in good times and bad, and then implement them. The Quran is nothing, guys, if you don't implement it into your lives. So it's not just about reading the Quran in Arabic and memorizing how to recite it in Arabic. It's about understanding the meaning of those verses and then applying them to your personal life for guidance. And again, the Quran is not like any book written by man, because first of all, it's the words of Allah, not the creation of his. Okay? The Quran are the words of Allah, meant to be understood, meant to be thought and pondered. And the Quran was sent down to last until the end of time, to serve as guidance for us, inspiration for us, rules for us, morality for us, values for us until the end of time. Okay, and by the way, as we talked about in our 6 o'clock class, that's one of the miracles. The Quran is one of the miracles of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what we have today, remember the hadith that we spoke about, whereas before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, he told the companions, he said, if you live long, you will live to see many people who will be able to recite the Quran beautifully by heart, but it'll never go past their throats, because they will not know the meaning of the Quran, because they won't know my sunnah. He said, if you live to see the day where many, many men will be able to recite the Quran beautifully, do not be intimidated by them. Do not feel threatened by them, because until they learn my sunnah, they will never understand it. And that's when he went on to say the sunnah will become abandoned. The sunnah will become forgotten. And he also went on to say the understanding, the traditional Islam that you all are upon and that I am upon will become abandoned and replaced with something bad. So the Prophet warned the companions about reciting the Quran and not pondering its meaning. And Allah himself admonishes the person who attributes himself to the revelation but fails to understand and practice it. Listen to what Allah says in the interpretation of the meaning. The example of those who were entrusted with the Torah and then did not take it on is like that of a donkey who carries volumes of books. Wretched is the example of the people who deny the signs of Allah, and Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. And again, we talked about how Allah gives us examples as to what happened to the people before us, the mistakes they made. This is also the beauty of Allah's speech, of his words. He warns us to not make the mistakes that they made, okay? He chastises us in this verse, those who follow their own desires rather than following the guidance that Allah has given us. And then look at this metaphor he used. He uses the metaphor as to how a person is like a donkey, or he could be like a dog that never feels at ease and is without refinement. Listen to this verse. Allah says, and the interpretation of the meaning, and if we wanted, we could have raised him, but he instead adhered to the earth and followed his own desire. So his example is like that of a dog. If you chase him, he begins to pant. But if you leave him alone, he still pants. That is the example of people who deny our signs. So relate the story so that perhaps people will give them thought. So here, this is the beauty of the Quran. It's the speech of Allah, not his creation. He's talking to us here. He's telling us here, don't make the mistake of being like a dog, like a donkey, like the people before us did. Okay? You don't just sit there and recite my words, but they have no bearing, no meaning upon you. Instead, you are living your life in this world following your own desires. Okay? You got the truth right here. You got the guidance from Allah right here, but you don't want to accept it. You rather give in to your desires. And this is where we've become today as a nation. We got some Muslims here in America who call themselves scholars. They want to sit down and play with Allah's words. They want to go through Allah's words and say that in regards to his laws and his rules of guidance, they're going to categorize them. We're going to put Allah's words, we're going to take his words and categorize them into that which we believe is essential for us and that which we believe is not. This is garbage. This is what the Jews did. This is what the people who Allah destroyed before us did. Instead of accepting the words of Allah as being his speech, and for us, we want to sit there and follow our desires. We could have been elevated. We could have been raised up. But instead, we follow the earth. We follow society. We're given in to what society considers to be the norm and not Allah. So, the higher aimed interpreter of the Quran, he doesn't occupy Muslims in minor issues that will take them away from understanding what their objectives are in this world. But instead, he prioritized the higher aims that will show a focused clarity of the issues that stand between us and our relationship with Allah. And again, we talked about how when the interpreter does that, he uses the themes. For example, instead of sitting around saying because you live in America, we're going to categorize Allah's laws into essentials and non-essentials. No, that's not how we do things. Instead, we're going to talk about what Allah says. How Allah says that society doesn't dictate anything. It's our job as Muslims to lead society, not to have society lead us. It's our job as Muslims to set the norm, not succumb to it. Now, as Muslims, we have to rearrange our priorities and our values in accordance to the significance that Allah tells us they should be in. We're not going to sit here and support feminism. I'm not going to sit here and allow women to have a say-so over men. Women have their job. Women have their responsibilities. Men have theirs. It's not the woman's job to run the masjid. So why would I put women on an executive board? I don't understand that. I'm giving an example. You're going to include women in the decision-making process of the mosque when her reward and responsibilities lie in that house, not the mosque. But this is what Muslims are doing today here in America. Our priorities have become twisted. Our priorities have become blurred. Our roles blurred. So we have to get back to the true traditional Islam. We need to go through Reformation. We have to reform our mentality to that of a Muslim and not the Kafirs. We have to understand there is no such thing as being half Muslim and half Kafir. Either you are Muslim or you're not. We're supposed to live by the laws of Allah, not the laws of man. So the higher aim-based interpreter, he will help the Muslims to understand this. He will take the words of Allah, the verses of Allah, based on a theme, and he will analyze them. And then he will show how they apply to today's society norms, and then show through the examples of those who came before us what happens if you do succumb to society's norms instead of Allah's. So a lot goes into interpreting the Quran. Number one, the Quran is a reformation of character, a reformation of value, a reformation of morality. And again, in order to understand the Quran, you have to believe in the divinity of Allah, the oneness of Him, that He is the creator. He is the absolute authority. And also you have to believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and understand that no guidance is better than the guidance that comes from Allah. No morals of society could ever be better than the moral set by Allah. Also, the job of the interpreter, is to help you develop and improve your condition here on earth without falling victim to what the rest of society is doing. You have to build your character, build your Islamic communities within society, and not allow society to dictate to you how your communities should be. And we have to always have consciousness of Allah. We have to always ponder and reflect upon the lessons of the previous nations. We have to always adhere and affirm the lordship of Allah, not man, and the wisdom behind his rulings, not believe that there's wisdom behind man's rulings. And we have to continuously maintain our love, hope, and fear of Allah, and adhere to his advice and adhere to his warnings. So that's the job of the true Quran interpreter. You know, that they're the ones who inspire us and keep us solid and steadfast in our purpose. They're not supposed to sit there and succumb to society. And that's why not everyone can teach the Quran. That you have to have grasped all those different sciences. All right. So I'm going to stop right here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Are there any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? And by the way, tomorrow is Friday, so that means we have the Call In and Ask Sister Layla live show. My Q&A is tomorrow at 9:30. Please make sure you guys share that. Let the Muslim sisters with all these questions, let them know that I'm live from 9:30 till 11 to answer any questions that they have about Islam. And they can bring them, inshallah. And again, guys, please support this dawah effort. You know, if you want to continue to benefit from our classes, we need your help and your support. All right. Any comments or questions? Okay, if not, I'm going to close out for tonight. Inshallah, I'll see everybody back here tomorrow. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.